Hello everybody and welcome to the... Whoa, I don't think that thing was on radar. Welcome to the Epic Flight Academy. My name is Mike Thompson. This is the private pilot ground school course and it comes in 3 parts. To guarantee your success, study this course online. Number 2, these videos parallel that online course. And thirdly, be sure to review this content with your flight instructor. Not everything I say in every one of these videos comes across clearly and understandably. If you have a question, review with your flight instructor. So, what's our topic today? Again, okay, just checking for the low-flying, whatever it was, radar. Our topic today is radar, your transponder, and the ADSB system. So let's talk about radar. Radar is an acronym for radio detection and ranging. Hey, there's a little piece of cocktail trivia for you. Radar sends out an energy pulse at 1090 megahertz. So commonly they'll say 1090 megahertz. That energy pulse has to bounce off something like, oh, I don't know, your airplane, and it receives that energy at 1030 megahertz, 1030 megahertz. And converts that to a target on a screen for a radar operator or controller to view and look at and use. So it is an energy pulse that bounces back. Now, it's important to understand that radar has to hit something to bounce back. In your airplane, you also have a transponder. The transponder, when it feels or receives that first impulse of 1090 megahertz, automatically responds back to that radar interrogation signal at 1030 megahertz. So early radar was just looking at a blip. Then transponders came along and that radar saw the blip along with some information sent back by that transponder. So what are the different types of radar? Well, we have what we call airport surveillance radar, primary and secondary radar. The primary radar is that energy pulse we talked about, and the secondary radar is the smart part of that beam. That's the air traffic radio beacon coming back. That's the transponder. That's secondary radar. So that's the transponder sending its signal back at 1030 megahertz. Airport surveillance radar, or typically called terminal radar approach control, and this is where you get the term TRACON, is known as approach or departure. So we're flying out of an airport like Daytona Beach and we talk to departure control, or we approach the airport and talk to approach control. This is airport surveillance radar, or TRACON. Then we have air route surveillance radar, ARSR, air route surveillance radar, ARSR, and this is a much larger, longer range radar. This radar ranges up to 200 nautical miles and is used at air traffic control centers. This is where they're long range watching aircraft moving through the air. There are approximately 20 of these centers across the United States. The primary purpose for the ARSR is the separation of IFR traffic. That is aircraft using the instrument flight rules. Now, they will separate VFR traffic and provide additional services on a workload permitting basis. So let's talk a little bit more about that transponder. So the primary signal goes out at 1090 and the secondary signal comes back at 1030. and it's carrying back information from that transponder. Now, there are particular codes that you can dial into this transponder to make you appear unique on air traffic control's radar screen. There are 4,096 possible different codes that ATC could ask you to dial in. That's why your transponder is frequently referred to as a 4096 transponder. Now you know where that term came from. There are some standardized codes that would apply across the board. And one of those is the VFR aircraft code. And that is 1200. 1200. 1200 is VFR. You dial in 1200 on your transponder, you're not being specifically identified as any particular aircraft. You're just seen as an aircraft out there operating VFR. Now, there's a couple more codes that you want to know, and these all start with 7. There's 3 in particular: 7500, 7600, and 7700. Now, 7500 is the code that a pilot would dial in if the aircraft were being hijacked. 7600 is the code the pilot would dial in if they had a radio communications failure. And 7700 is the code the pilot would dial in if the pilot had some type of an emergency or was being intercepted by intercept aircraft. Say, example, in the case of a TFR violation. Okay, that would be 7700. Now, remember earlier we said that the primary purpose of ATC and the primary purpose of the radar systems were separation of IFR traffic, but they would separate VFR traffic on a workload available basis? Yes. When we request VFR separation, we refer to that as flight following. And it's very easy to request flight following. We can find the approach control facility's radio frequency, dial it in, and hop on the frequency, identify ourselves, and request VFR flight following. Now, unlike IFR operations, VFR flight following is voluntary, and my compliance with the controller's instructions are also voluntary. I don't have to do exactly what they say, but I probably will because we're working in cooperation, and if I'm not going to, I'll just communicate with that controller and let them know what's going on and what my intentions are, etc. If we look back at our radar system, we saw that early radar systems just bounced off the airplane and created a blip. Later radar systems bounced off the aircraft and received the blip along with information from the transponder. Now, the next generation of this avionics equipment is in fact called by the FAA, guess what? NextGen. The FAA refers to this as NextGen. NextGen includes ADS-B. So back in about 2010, the FAA was looking at ways to help make the skies less congested or make the airports less congested. We needed a way to move aircraft more efficiently through the system and to help aircraft see and avoid each other more accurately. And the FAA initiated what they call NextGen. Now, part of NextGen is the ADSB system, and the FAA required aircraft to be in compliance with the ADSB out portion on January 1st of 2020. Now, in spite of that, not all aircraft were required, and it's not required in all airspace. So please review this carefully in your course materials and with your flight instructor. But in the airspace that it is required, what exactly is ADS-B? What does it mean? ADS-B means automatic, dependent, surveillance, broadcast. Okay, why do we call it that? Automatic in that the pulse sent out from your ADS-B is automatic. It doesn't have to be sent by the pilot. It doesn't have to be interrogated by radar. It just automatically goes out. Okay, dependent. What does that mean? Dependent on something. Dependent on what? It is dependent upon an accurate position. And so, I mean, in truth, in day-to-day practice, what it's really dependent upon is GPS and WAAS giving us an accurate position of that aircraft. Surveillance, what does that mean? It means that this ADS-B system will broadcast to surveillance radar. So surveillance radar and ATC is still in the loop. And broadcast, well, that's just what it says it is. It's saying that ADS-B system is broadcasting out to satellites, other aircraft, and radar surveillance systems. The interesting thing about ADS-B in the broadcast portion is it is one aircraft broadcasting directly to the other aircraft. Two aircraft in flight, and ADS-B broadcast directly between them, as well as talking to the satellites and surveillance radar. So that gives us some idea of how the ADS-B system works broadcasting out. So in January of 2020, ADS-B out was required. Now remember, we talked about 1090 megahertz being radar interrogation and 1030 being the response. Well, you may hear about 978 megahertz. What's that all about? This is an additional response frequency from your ADS-B system in order to prevent that 1030 megahertz bandwidth from being overcrowded or overloaded. And in electronic terms, we mean we run out of bandwidth. So they added the 978 megahertz bandwidth. So that's ADS-B out. Now, what about ADS-B in? Not all ADS-B receivers have the in capability. If you do have ADS-B in capability, you will be able to see all of those other aircraft broadcasting. Remember, ADS-B stands for broadcasting their position. Okay, so that's very valuable to you and me as pilots. We can see that in the G1000, for example, right on the MFD screen. Again, it's not required for me to receive it. It is required for me to send it out. So folks, that is a quick overview of radar, transponders, and the ADS-B system. I hope you enjoyed that. Join us next time.